A grand juror in the Breonna Taylor case has filed a motion to have records from the proceedings made public. The grand jury decided last week not to charge the Louisville police officers at the scene with any crimes in connection with Taylor's death. Kentucky Attorney General Daniel Cameron said that he will comply with the judge's orders and release the recordings in court on Wednesday. And he also confirmed that he did not recommend murder charges to the grand jury, a charge that many protesters and Taylor's family were calling for. CBS News correspondent Adriana Diaz is with us now from Louisville to talk a little bit more about this. So Adriana, just break it down for us. What is this grand juror asking for in this motion, and why is it a major change in this case?
Vlad, Anne-Marie, I cannot overstate how shocking we all were when we saw this notice to file a motion yesterday. It was sent to me by an attorney, and here's what it says. A juror who was in the grand jury proceedings, who was part of this secret selective group that reviews whether or not charges should be brought in this case, is asking that all the proceedings, all the transcripts be released, and also asking to talk publicly. And they were really careful about the wording. Grand jury proceedings are secretive by nature. They want people to be able to make their judgments on whether charges should be brought in cases and in crimes without fear of retribution, right? This is really the core of how this system works. But this juror is asking to talk. And what they did to kind of find a loophole is say, can I talk about what didn't happen? Can I talk about what charges were not presented, what defendants were not presented, as a way to kind of circumvent, the fact that the whole proceedings are under seal? That's one part of this. And sorry, the planes fly super close to the ground here in Louisville. Another part of this is that the Attorney General is going to release the recording of these proceedings, but not necessarily because of this grand juror's complaint, but because a judge ordered him to yesterday. And that is the judge that's presiding over the case against former Detective Brett Hankinson. He was arraigned yesterday. He pleaded not guilty. And as in part of that arraignment, the judge ordered the grand jury to release all of this information. The Attorney General to release all this information. The Attorney General could have appealed, but in a statement late last night, we got it around, 11 p.m. or so, the grand jury the Attorney General dropped this bomb saying that he would comply. But he wasn't happy about it. I mean, he says in this statement, he says the grand jury is supposed to be a secretive body. It's apparent that the public interest in this case isn't going to allow that to happen. It says he and his team have an ethical obligation not to release the recordings, but they are bound to do so by this order. And so he says, despite these concerns, we will comply with the judge's orders to release the recording, and releasing the recording will also address the legal complaint filed by an anonymous grand juror. The news was breaking left and right yesterday. This case is really unraveling. And once we have this information, it really could crack it open.
Yeah, I mean, we're putting up there, Adriana, the response from Mr. Cameron. So what questions do these developments raise about Daniel Cameron and the grand jury proceedings overall?
The key questions have really been what happened in the room where it happened, right? So what was presented to the grand jury as evidence? Did they see body camera footage of that night? That's some body camera footage that we've seen leaking over the past few days. What that footage shows is that there were policies, if it's true, if this footage is true, it hasn't been verified by CBS News, but that footage shows that there were policies broken at the crime scene. People who were involved in the shooting, there were 3 officers, by certain accounts, were walking freely in the crime scene. That is not allowed for obvious reasons. Everyone's supposed to be separated. And they're supposed to have an escort actually with them the whole time after the incident. So the question is, what evidence was presented to the grand jury? And then what charges were recommended to the grand jury? Because, the Attorney General, who's the prosecutor in this case, he makes recommendations on charges. And then it's up to the grand jury to decide whether they want to move forward with those charges. And so he actually said as part of his statement that he did not recommend charges. Well, what he said was he only recommended charges for wanton endangerment against former Detective Hankinson. And that was the charge that was for him firing blindly into a neighbor's apartment. Nothing to do directly with Breonna Taylor losing her life that night. And so the questions that this raises is, clearly the juror wants to speak for a reason. And the juror calls out the Attorney General in its notice and essentially says that it doesn't agree with the way that the Attorney General was characterizing what happened in his press conference last week when he announced no charges for murder, when he only announced that one wanton endangerment charge. And here's the key. A former prosecutor and criminal defense attorney I was talking to today said the problem is that the Attorney General, with his comments in that press conference on Wednesday, made it seem as though the grand jury had all the evidence that they needed to see to consider possible charges. And what all of this is suggesting, the grand jury wanting to speak out, is that, and the Attorney General now saying himself, they were only presented with one charge. There are a lot of questions that have to be answered.
Yeah, a ton of questions. You know, first thing I thought of when I saw that he said that he would comply with whatever the judge's conclusion is, you know, how much of what is released is going to be redacted. And I didn't see the complete statement, so I don't know, Adriana, if he said, you know, I will provide a complete transcript or recording, or if there was any sort of qualifying words in that.
I didn't see any qualifying words at all. It looks like he's ready to show the public and the court what happened in these proceedings. They're going to be releasing recordings. So my understanding is audio recordings. I'm hearing from some people locally that in the past, when that has happened, they could be released on a CD. Remember those? So, you know, this doesn't mean necessarily that when this is handed into the court that it's going to be, you know, blasted all around the world immediately. It could be that it's handed into the court on a CD, and then us in the press, when we make a request to the court to make to see that public information, they'll have to make copies and all that. So I don't know. I'm just saying this may not, you know, we may not have all this information tomorrow at noon by the deadline. But in general, I've spoken to half a dozen attorneys in the past, you know, since 8 p.m. last night, and they've told me that when things are entered into the court file as the judge has ordered them to be, they are then in the public record.
All right. Adriana Diaz with some really important reporting there. Adriana, thank you very, very much. We appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.